Ragtime came into existence long before it was given a name. By the end of the 1890s, the term defined a performance style and practices applied to composing and playing popular song, dance, and instrumental music. There was an abundance of sheet music testifying to the multifold existence of ragtime. Ragtime was uniformly defined as having African American musical roots. Therefore, the genre of ragtime must be defined according to its duality between written music and oral tradition European music. The existence of ragtime exists within these blurred cultural elements and practices. Historically, ragtime was variously conceived as song, dance, and syncopated instrumental music, even though the majority of sheet music available today is for piano. Cakewalk and coon songs became synonymous in the public mind for a general marketing scheme. Individual pieces of work were called rags rather than ragtime. The noun rag may be linked to the handkerchief flaunting in the 19th century folk dancing, but to rag as a verb directs attention to a performative emphasis of ragtime, meaning to syncopate a tune. The concept of ragging preceded composed ragtime and meant embellishing and decorating melodies. Ragtime was created and popularized by itinerant African American musicians, many of whom did not read or write music. These musicians first developed ragtime as a playing style, disseminating this annotated music in brothels, saloons, bars, and other similar sites where blacks first found their performing opportunities after the Civil War. One of the first musicians to publish a ragtime composition was Ben Harney, who claims to be the inventor of the new style. His "You've Been a Good Old Wagon, but You're Brown Down," published in 1895 with the assistance of John Biller, was one of the most important examples of early ragtime. The chronology of ragtime as a written tradition might be misleading with regard to the actual emergence of ragtime as a distinct musical style. It was much more difficult to publish a rag, and for African Americans, it was generally more difficult to receive acknowledgement and repayment in the publishing industry. Some of them, for instance, Louis Chavon, chose not to publish their compositions because they had established reputations as performers rather than composers. When ragtime shifted from oral to written tradition, it became known beyond its initial limited audience. However, the publishing of ragtime did not stop the improvised tradition, which continued to coexist. Because of their commercial interests and general unfamiliarity with ragtime as it was originally conceived, white musicians created a compositional and playing style distinct from that of African Americans. As the music developed and became more elaborate, playing became increasingly difficult. Thus, simplified versions of ragtime were published in the second decade of the 20th century to meet the expectations of amateur players.
Historically, ragtime is understood to be a mixture of song, dance, and syncopated instrumental music. At its early stages, instrumental and vocal ragtime generally was synonymous with cakewalk and coon songs in the public mind. Coon songs were typically performed by whites in blackface and by blacks in minstrel shows. Whites illustrated insulting and stereotypical lyrics and sang in Negro dialect. Insults came in the form of painting African Americans as lazy, dishonest, violent, greedy, sexually promiscuous, and as thieves. Ragtime was created and popularized by traveling African American musicians who most often did not read or write music. These musicians first developed ragtime as a playing style, spreading new music through brothels, saloons, and bars. These are the places that gave them their first performing opportunities after the Civil War. The original audiences being the owners of bars and saloons, prostitutes, and affluent white men. Even when ragtime started to shift to printed music, it was still improvisational in nature. Ragtime's shift to printed music is quite interesting because whites wrote down what they thought they heard when they listened to African American playing style. This transcription resulted in different products distinct from that of African Americans. This style often reflected and exposed their own aesthetic values and predispositions rather than those of African Americans. The transcription reduced and limited what was originally played and removed opportunity for improvisation. Thus, the result is a superficial form that made it to the printed medium. The printing of ragtime, however, marked a crucial stage in its development, as now it was possible for the music to have a broader impact on American culture. Some of the well-known performers include Scott Joplin, a composer, and his followers who learned to read and write music. They created new pulses through the written medium, and their compositional style came to be called classic ragtime. Most white composers worked for their publishing companies and thus gained quick and widespread popularity. Tom Turpin, another well-known performer, was an especially great ragtime performer, opening the Rosebud Bar in St. Louis, where many pianists got their first start. Scott Hayden, Arthur Marshall, Joe Jordan, to name a few, also got their start in this cafe.
Playing the piano had become very popular for young white women, so you can just imagine how this drove and promoted piano sales as well as sheet music sales for middle-class families. One reason for this popularity is due to the developing of new jobs. Being able to play the piano and sight read became the new trend, as these were the qualities that were to be useful for jobs in the music industry. However, most of these roles were held by white American women. In fact, playing the piano was the new trademark for your typical middle-class education for girls. Sheet music publishers play a major role in this because they targeted young girls and labeled them as consumers of ragtime. Now, on the other hand, not all women held the same experience. More specifically, it was disappointing to see that African American women were depicted in degrading and stereotypical roles, while white women were depicted as singers. Women were prime consumers of ragtime era sheet music, and women composers played a larger role than many might assume. A representative number of about 300 ragtime women composers appear to have contributed to the history of the genre. Therefore, when ragtime is highly portrayed to be a male-dominated genre, do not believe the hype. There were women like Pauline Albert, a vaudeville performer. She reached her fame as a pianist, recording as many as 90 piano rolls for the piano roll company Duo Art. Her piano was reportedly enthusiastic and fast. Another notable woman is Rudy Blesh. Her rags were performed by the early New Orleans jazz bands. With all of these achievements, it is unfortunate that we have been overlooked and neglected by the documents of ragtime. Previous documents have discovered only one early rag and two later rags composed by African American female pianists. Even the genre of ragtime highlights how the work of women, African American women specifically, goes unnoticed.